Hi and welcome. We are very glad today here. I'm Michael Wozniak, and
I'm Nathalie Di Marci.
we're very glad today to have a very special guest, Doug O'Brien. So we're happy to have been chasing Doug and to have him now with us. Thank you, Nathalie, for the chase.
Thank you, Doug, for accepting this invitation. It's
It's my
just
pleasure. Thanks for
crazy.
asking.
And for the very small amount of people who don't know who you are, can you present yourself?
I'll do the best that I can, but I will say, you've been chasing me for so long, and now that you've caught me, I mean, it's probably like a dog that chases a school bus and goes like, well, now that you caught it, what are you gonna do with it?
You
Did the
know,
dog ever stop to think about that? I don't think so.
I'm not going. It's a bulldog. I'm not going to let you go.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'm Doug O'Brien. I'm an American. I've been living in the New York City area for about 40 years, but recently, because of COVID, my wife and I moved to our little country weekend place, and we've been here ever since. So I'm in the upstate area of New York, about the Hudson Valley, in this little tiny country house, which has one advantage, well, several advantages. Like, it's upstate, not in the city, but it's also has got that because I am a piano player. And for all of my years in New York City, I started off as a musician, and then I segued into doing NLP in the mid 80s, early 90s. And I've been doing NLP and hypnosis pretty much ever since then, more recently, the havening techniques as well. But it's really wonderful to be able to sort of do that again, too. So it's nice to be coming, in a sense, full circle. I'm not doing this professionally at all, but it's nice to be able to just sit and play, for my own fun. And there's no neighbors to complain. My next door neighbor is a horse, so we're good.
That's just amazing. And
Yeah.
I think that's how you started. You were a piano teacher.
Yeah,
Is
I
it correct?
taught piano, and I played in places. I was a player. I was in a band. I was several bands actually, and played in clubs, various things like that. But yeah, most of the money that I actually earned came from teaching. So I taught piano. So I've been a teacher for a long time. And in the 80s, when I first started learning NLP, I wanted to get good at this thing called Sleight of Mouth, because I had a friend who had gone and gotten their master practitioner training from Robert Dilts. He taught it. He invented it, taught it. So I went and got my master practitioner training from Robert Dilts so that I could learn it too. And then when I came back from that training, and all of my co-trainers, I was a trainer for Tony Robbins at the time. When I came back to New York City, all the other trainers of Tony Robbins said, "What's that NLP stuff? Teach us how it goes." So I did my first training, like 1989, teaching a Sleight of Mouth class. And I've been doing that pretty much ever since. It's kind of my thing. It has become my thing. I do other things too. I still do hypnosis a lot, and havening and other things. But yeah, Sleight of Mouth is something that's still with me.
Yes, and your book, it's absolutely amazing. It's very, very clear and very, very graphic.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So for people who don't really know what Sleight of Mouth is about, what in your experience is the most common problem in communication in general?
Most common problem in communication?
Yeah.
I think probably that people are not listening.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem in communication. They are too busy thinking about what they're going to say before they really, take in fully what the person has been trying to communicate themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think a lot of Sleight of Mouth is really about that. It's learning to listen for what the actual belief structure is, what the person is actually saying, so that you can get a real precise, understanding of that before you try to change them into something else. Most people think of Sleight of Mouth as a belief change process, and yes, it is. And in order to get to where you want to go, first you have to know where you are.
Okay.
Absolutely. And there is this belief that in NLP we should avoid the why question. What's your comment or your think about what do you think about the the why question.
Well, why do you ask that question?
Because I want you to let us go to the belief question.
All right, good. So that's why you ask a why question, is because you get that kind of answer. You get a because answer. And, you know, if I may illustrate on my whiteboard.
Absolutely, of course.
What we've learned about belief structures, what NLP in general is about the structure of subjective experience, right? That's what the subtitle is of NLP Volume 1. And, you know, it is really not so much about techniques and persuasion and stuff. It is about understanding the structure of subjective experience. How do we actually believe what we believe, and how does it become operational in our systems? So it's nice to know that a belief has a structure. Every single belief, every belief in the world has the same structure, which is to say it has a cause and effect, symbolized by an arrow or a triangle leading to a square, a cause, effect. And then there's a meaning that's attached to that. So this three-part normalized belief system is every single belief in the world, although it's rarely stated that way. Beliefs are usually stated in a shortcut like it's good, or it's bad, or it's right, or it's wrong, or I'm right, or you're wrong, or, you know, and any sort of like shortcut little things, but you don't know what their whole belief is unless you ask questions. And the what question, why, tends to bring you to this part of the belief. Because, you know, if you get a because answer, the word because has in it cause, right? This is the cause that leads to the effect. So you're going to get information. You're going to get belief level information when you ask the word why. So the reason NLP has said, let's not ask that question, is because NLP is derived from a lot of different therapeutic approaches, you know, talk therapy, where they felt, they being the NLP people who decided these things back in the day, Bandler, Grinder, Dilts, et al., that it wasn't that functional to find out. They wanted to know how we're going to be different. How are we going to go forward into the future from here? And the why just sort of said, you know, well, why are you feeling this? Why are you doing this? And it became analysis paralysis kind of thing. And people would sit and talk and sit and talk and sit and talk. And there's a lot of validity in that way of thinking, that asking how questions or what are you going to do about it, you know, gives you a sense of direction much more readily than a why will.
Yeah.
Right. But having that reason, if you want to do belief change, you have to sort of know where you are before you lead them somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just before you mentioned the word persuasion when you're talking about NLP, since we're all in an NLP context, I want to make this little digression. And what is, according to you, the difference between persuasion and manipulation, for instance? Because those are words that scare people a lot here, especially in French-speaking countries.
Manipulations makes people afraid.
But those words are kind of scary, you know.
Oh, it's interesting because, you know, the word manipulate comes from the French, right?
Yeah.
It's a French derivative, because man, M-A-N, as you, I think, probably are aware, correct me if I'm wrong, but is the French word for hand, is it not? Yeah. So to manipulate is to move something with your hand. That is the definition of manipulate, is to move something with your hand. Yeah. So there's nothing fearful about that. We do that all the time. You know, I was just writing on the board over there because I was moving something with my hand. I was manipulating the pen. I think there's a lot of things put on to the word manipulation, because, you know, it's not bad. Yeah, if I go to a chiropractor, I want the chiropractor to manipulate my spine and put me in the right order so I feel better again. You know, I want these things to happen. People go to concerts, to movies, to things because they want to have their emotions manipulated by the artists in a fun way, you know, so it's what we want. Just it's that word that has this meaning ascribed to it, right? The meaning part, the circle part of the belief that says, well, if I'm being manipulated, then, you know, that's bad. They have some sort of meaning that they've ascribed to it. So what we attempt to do, I think, in NLP is to say, yeah, we will manipulate you in a way that is appropriate and positive and constructive for you so that you can, like a chiropractor, leave the office feeling better. You know, things are more aligned with what your purpose, and, you know, we help you to get there. So it's good manipulation.
Yeah. And this is quite a good example of a belief. So manipulation is bad. So how would you, for instance, take that belief and put it in a normalized belief structure?
Well, okay, so that's good. Thank you.
Let's challenge you.
All right. Let's go. Come on.
Go for it.
All right. So just to remind you, normalized belief structure has those three parts: cause, effect, and meaning.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm again tilt my little board down here. So manipulation is bad. Is that what you said?
Yeah. For instance, I come and tell you manipulation is bad.
Okay. So Nathalie, you've read my book a few times. So where would you put that in this normalized belief structure? Do you think that's a cause, effect, or a meaning?
I think it's more between the effect and the meaning. No?
Here? Between?
More in that second part?
Second part, yeah. I think probably. But here's the interesting thing is we don't really know. We don't really know until we ask questions and unpack this thing. If you recall from the book, I have this little illustrated thing where I say beliefs are shortcuts, and they're kind of like labels on a suitcase.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right? So we know it's like, this is mine, or that's yours. You know, we know just the labels, it's good, it's bad. We put these labels on this thing, and we don't really know what's inside that suitcase until we unpack it. So we open it up and say, what's inside? So we have to unpack beliefs.
Yeah.
Not that just little shortcuts. We don't want to just accept the little shortcuts. So a statement like it's bad probably is in the meaning area, but we don't know until we ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to unpack the suitcase by asking questions. So I will ask you this, Michel, how do you know that? How do you know that NLP is bad or manipulation is bad?
Manipulation is bad, but I will create because I don't believe it. But let's imagine I would say, because it takes your free will away.
Okay, so because you said that because, so that's that sounds like it's in the cause area. So it often starts with a word if.
Yeah.
Could be a word like when, but it's like this thing. Your free will is taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So if your free will is taken away, then what?
Then you're manipulated. Actually, you. And it's bad.
And that's bad. Okay, that works. So if your free will is taken away, then you are manipulated, and that's bad.
Perfect.
Okay,
Excellent.
great.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting example because very often people, when they start using Sleight of Mouth, I noticed they tend not to know how to take a single sentence like manipulation is bad and create this normalized belief structure. So it was interesting to do it live with an
example.
Yeah, with an example. So it gives an idea of how this process is being done. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of different things one could say using NLP processes or NLP techniques to, if a person has a belief like it's manipulative, manipulation is bad, you could say, well, how do you know that? You could say, well, in what way? Right? It's unspecified verb. You know, how do you know who says it's bad? You could go for the loss performative, you know, using different meta model questions. So there's lots of ways you could retrieve information. You could argue the point. You could do lots of different things. But if you want to get the belief structure, then you have to just, you know, ask questions that will lead you to understanding without trying to change anything.
Yeah.
We're not trying to change anything. We're just trying to find what it is you believe.
Excellent.
Then say, and by the way, like when you do anchoring, you've got to test it, right? You might do a couple things to say, oh, I've got a good anchor there, but if you touch them on the shoulder and nothing happens, you don't have a good anchor. right? So you got to test and say, okay, look, the change happened. It's like you test it. Oh, look what a change happened. And so you test it to find out if the change happens. Same way with when you've elicited a belief, you want to test it.
And how do you do that? Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You didn't expect that question, right?
That was the question I was leading to. So you test it by running it past the person. So let's pretend that you are the person that said this a minute ago. So I would say, Michel, so are you saying that if free will is taken away, then you are manipulated and that's bad?
Yeah.
Okay, and I look for that response. So I look for that congruent response where the head is nodding yes and the mouth is saying yes. So it's a congruent response other than conscious communication and the conscious communication both are saying yes.
Yeah.
So sometimes we refer to that as a full body nod. They get this very congruent yes, that's it. If they do something like, yeah, then it's probably not exactly right. And you want to go back and ask some more questions.
And in your experience, does it happen sometimes that when you extract the normalized belief structure, that already at that moment the person realizes that there is a flaw in the reasoning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Very, very, very often that happens. Exactly. Because they'll look at it and they'll say, yeah, that's what I believe. Boy, that's stupid. or something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Excellent.
Perhaps before we continue, I would like you to explain why the sleight of mouth labeling. It comes from a sleight of hand, perhaps.
Oh, where does it actually term?
Yes.
Okay, sure. I'd be happy to explain that. Robert Dilts told me how he came up with that idea.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I love those kind of stories.
It may not be getting it precisely correct, but this is the way I remember what he told me. Is that he said perception is always 100%, but it's the interpretation of the perception that's the problem, and that's just like in magic. In sleight of hand, I might be doing something with the cards and say, pick a card, any card. And, I'm directing your attention to a certain thing, right? So I'm saying, and this is what's important. Look at this. And then, but meanwhile, I'm, pocketing the other card or whatever. So I'm doing a little thing and you're not noticing the other bits consciously because I'm drawing your attention here. So it's a sleight of hand to get you to have an interpretation of what it is that you're perceiving. Rather than the actual holistic thing. So in a sense, that's where sleight of mouth comes from. I'm directing your attention to a certain thing I want you to pay attention to. So it's that same sort of idea that we believe things because we are not paying attention to a lot of other stuff that's there.
Yeah.
Right. I believe that manipulation is bad because I'm not paying attention to the chiropractors and the people writing on the blackboards and all those other things that are manipulative. And God darn it, I like that stuff. I want to be manipulated. I want the massage therapist to work out those knots. Thank you very much for using your hands to move something. I like that. I'm not focused on that, so I think manipulation's bad. Right? So sleight of mouth say, well, let's focus on this. This is good too, isn't it? So we're manipulating you, if you will, to focus on these other things that you weren't paying attention to before, which changes your perspective. It's really about changing perspective. It's like everybody is right from their perspective.
Of course.
So the idea that I don't know if you saw my little video about sleight of mouth, but it's good though. I made it a long time ago. I was a young snapper, but it's good. It's right, I guess, when I wrote the book, so probably 12 years old or so at this point. Anyway, I talk about how if you have a bunch of people sitting in a circle, right? And we're sitting in a circle, let's just say in the desert somewhere. So it's, empty area, just flat ground outside. And it's the sun is setting in the west and we're sitting in a circle and we've put some object in the middle of the circle, like a drum or something. Depending on where you're sitting in that circle, you'll see that drum from a variety of different perspectives, right? And if you're sitting on the east side and the sun is setting down in the west, mostly that sun is in your eyes. You're not going to be able to see the drum very well at all. You're going to see it in silhouette, right? But if you're sitting on the west side of the circle, you see that same drum, bathed in a golden light. You'll see it with great clarity, and you'll see the people across this circle from you as well, bathed in this golden light with great clarity. So you have very different perceptions of the same thing at the same time. And one person might say, oh, this is great. It's such a beautiful view. I can see things with such clarity. I love this circle. Another person on the other side is going like, this sucks. I hate this circle. Sun's in my eyes. I can't appreciate this at all. I don't even know who's over there. What's that thing in the middle of the circle? Can't even tell, right? They can have very different experience of the same thing at the same time. Is one right and the other one wrong? No, they're both right from their perspective. So what Sleight of Mouth is saying, well, let's help the person see things from a different perspective, and then they'll go, oh yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Makes sense, you're right. From this perspective, I see that too. So it's about pacing and
Leading.
Yeah, I love it because generally when I give this example, I always talk only about the shape of the object. So if you look at this pencil like this, you see a circle.
Yeah.
Look at this, you see a rectangle.
That's great. Yeah.
But the amazing thing in what you said is that you're integrating also the environment. So there's the drum, but there's also the impact of the environment and the angles.
Sure.
And this I never integrated in the example, and it's very, very interesting because
I like your
that's
pen, though.
how
That's
the
really
world
great.
works.
And also don't forget, we may be bringing our own history to the circle. It's like, oh yeah, the last time I was in a circle like this, a thing in the middle blew up and that was terrible, Right? That was bad. That's terrible. Right. So I can have my own experiences that I've come to the circle with that color my perception
Yeah,
based on what I'm bringing to it, in my own self.
exactly. Well, that's very interesting. I never looked at it with this angle.
Yeah, that's great. I love your pen example. That's really good because this versus this.
Uh-huh.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
I always present Sleight of Mouth as an advanced tool, NLP tool.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be the skills that you need to understand Sleight of Mouth? Or is it something that anyone, even without training, can familiarize themselves with or use?
Yeah. That's a really great question. I think you're right. It is an advanced skill in some ways because, I learned it in my master practitioner training. I did a 15-day practitioner training back in my day. Practitioner trainings were long and you learned a lot and, 15 days in a row. And they were long, full, packed days. And so I think I learned as much in that practitioner training as most people these days learn in a whole practitioner, master practitioner, whatever training. I might be wrong, but it was very useful to then go on to my master practitioner training with Robert, and Sleight of Mouth was part of that. Interestingly, just as a aside for a moment, I was asking Robert these days, how much do you devote to Sleight of Mouth in your master practitioner? Do you still teach Sleight of Mouth in your master practitioner? He said, yeah, but not very much. I spent a day, maybe a few hours on it. It was 3 days in my master practitioner training. He really, and with Todd Epstein was there as well, so both of them were there co-teaching it. It was pretty impactful, actually. But apparently he doesn't teach it anything like I did. He invented all this, icon representation charts. He invented all that stuff. But one of the reasons, by the way, just as an aside, the reason I wrote my book is because when his book on Sleight of Mouth came out, he didn't have any of those charts in there.
Yeah.
I'm going like, well, how is anybody going to learn this stuff without those visual representations? I find it critical to really understand this stuff. It might just be me, maybe it's my own way of learning, but I found that the important thing of how to actually learn this so that you can, learn it and memorize it, get good at it and use it in life.
I remember that once you were explaining that your dad used to have a toolkit, and it was you remember,
Oh my God,
of
yes.
course, that anecdote.
It's also
I, I hate to disparage the dead, but yeah, because man, if you went down to the basement and looked at the work, I mean, it was just piled with stuff. I mean, you couldn't find anything. Nobody could find anything except him, because he kind of knew where he left it, and he'd rummage around and say, "Here's the screwdriver. Anybody could have found that. What's the matter with you?" He was drunk most of the time too. But yeah, I don't want to disparage the dead. He was just this messy drunk guy. No, he was a wonderful father. I'm kidding. Wonderful, just a messy tool organizer. But yeah, so that's the idea. My neighbor across the street, actually right next door, Mr. Schilt, I couldn't believe it. You walked into his workbench area. He had an equally large workbench in his basement, but everything was like laid out, and he had this pegboard behind the workbench that had outlines of all the different tools. Mm-hmm. And you'd take the tool and you'd know exactly where it went, because it had this organizational tool thing. And so you said, "Where's this go?" "Oh, there." "Where's this one go?" "Oh, there," because it had that layout. That's what Sleight of Mouth gives you. Yeah. It gives you that, layout of these tools, so you can say, I want that change person history. I'm sorry, hierarchy of criteria. I want that model of the world. I want that, I'm calling things different names for some reason. The consequence pattern, or the intention pattern. That's the one.
Yeah. And for me, it's interesting because as any tools, there are elegant way of using them. There are less elegant ways of using them. What is the most elegant way of using Sleight of Mouth? Is it just trying to go through all the patterns with the person? Is there any intuition to know where to go? What's the best way?
Yeah, it's very intuitive of where to start and where to go, and there is no real wrong way. But I agree with you. There are more elegant ways. One of the ways that I like to start often is by first thinking about something that's not actually part of Sleight of Mouth, which is the agreement frame.
Yeah.
The agreement frame is something that I think I talk about in the book, but
yes.
Robert Dilts did not teach this. I learned this from Tony Robbins in another context entirely. But I think it's very, very useful from, starting off with rapport and saying, yeah, I see what you're saying. And from this perspective, I'd see the same thing. And so it's yes. And if we look at it from this perspective, you might see it from a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a pacing and leading. Instead of what most people do, which is they say, yeah, but this, or yeah, but that, or yeah, but this, or yeah, but that. So they butt up against each other, and nobody ever gets anywhere. Yeah. I'm right, you're right. I'm wrong, you're, it's what happens. Yeah. But the agreement frame says, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I get that. You're right. Or I appreciate that. Or I really respect what you're saying. And how about this? Have you tried this? So you're aligning with it. It's like a keto. You align with the energy and then you redirect it.
Yeah.
So the pattern that's closest to that in my way of thinking is the intention pattern, the one that I couldn't think of a moment ago. The intention pattern. Because you say, yes, I agree. I know your intention is to do this thing, and it's not really getting you where you want to go, is it? Yeah. And so what if we look at it from this perspective? Maybe you could do it like this, and you redirect the energy somewhere else. So the intent pattern is really a great place to start. I often will recommend that people do not just one, but multiple patterns, like 3 in a row. So you might start with the intent pattern, then go to the consequence pattern. Yes. They're a nice pairing, the 2 arrows on each side of the diagram thing. So one's the intent, one's the consequence. So I know your intent is this, but it's not really getting you there, is it? And if you keep going in that direction, it's going to end up someplace miles apart from where you want to actually end up, doesn't it? Yeah. So isn't it more important to do this than to do that? So you go to hierarchy of criteria as an example.
Yeah.
For me, one of the most impactful patterns always is the metaphor pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you can tell a good story, if you can get a good anecdote, a really good example of how, your point of view is going to be useful for this person, stories go a long ways.
Yeah. And we were having also a masterclass with Jeffrey Zeig.
No way, really?
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
Some days ago. It was awesome. And we were talking about questioning and how to ask good questions and how to ask strategic questions. So
Nice.
what would be our combining with Sleight of Mouth? How can we have a strategy for asking questions?
I'm just really impressed with your ability to get people like Jeffrey Zeig on your. I mean, that's.
And you.
I need to model you. Hey, me, I'm easy. But that's great. Strategy. What's the question again? How
You
do
were
ask
so
the question?
impressed.
Flabbergasted.
No, I was still in shock. So that's great. I mean, Jeffrey Zeig is like a god. He is Mr. Erickson. He's the Ericksonian guy. He runs the Ericksonian Foundation in Phoenix and does a brilliant job of what's the word, curating Erickson's legacy, and it's just fantastic. I've learned so much from him. I've never met the man or spoken to him directly. I emailed with him a few times, but God, he's great.
He's
so
amazing.
Yeah, very cool. So what's the question?
The question is, how can we use Sleight of Mouth in a strategic way in order to ask good questions?
I don't know.
Strategically.
Good question.
That's the same thing that he said. He said that we had a niche and that we should explore more. So I'm wondering, can we use Sleight of Mouth to get strategic with questions?
Yeah, probably. Let me just think about that. But I will tell you, the idea of asking questions is something that I harp on in my coaching practice, in my coaching trainings with people, is something I learned many years ago. Back in history, in the NLP world, Leslie Cameron Bandler came up with this idea that every human being has, which I think she called an imperative question. Mm-hmm. And she did this whole long process to get to whatever your imperative question is. And I used to use this example. I kid you not. This was the example I've used for years. That on one hand, Mother Teresa, and no one really knows what her imperative, nobody ever went through the process with her to know what her imperative question was, but it was probably something like, how can I help? How can I be of service? Mm-hmm. And wherever she went in the world, she went with that question. So whether she was going to an orphanage in Biafra or going into a boardroom on Wall Street in Manhattan, she'd be going in there asking, how can I be of service? How can I, and then on the other hand, I swear to heaven, I've been using this example for 30 years. There's people like Donald Trump who probably have a question like, what's in it for me? And wherever they go, whether it's an orphanage in Biafra or a boardroom on Wall Street, he's going into that same thing, like, what's in it for me? How can I, profit from this or something like that? And I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe Donald Trump is saying, how can I be of service? I don't know, but I use those examples. I really truly did, because people do, I think, probably have that. So the problem with this notion that of Leslie Cameron Bandler's is it took a long time big process to get to whatever that core question was. And then there wasn't a really great way of changing it. So you could find out what the problem is and it's like, oh, that's the problem. Well, what do you do about it? I don't know. So it wasn't really a great process. But Tony Robbins, who has this wonderful ability to take something that's complex and find a simple representation of it, good and bad issues, sometimes makes things too simple. But he sort of simplified things and said, well, isn't it kind of true that your life is created by what you focus on? Like if you focus on positive things, you tend to get positive things. You focus on negative things, you tend to get negative things, like the law of attraction, as it were. And isn't it true that if you ask yourself a good question, you get good answers? So what if you just change the questions instead of like, what's wrong with me? If you said, what's right with me, or what's getting better, or instead of what do I do to deserve this?
Yeah.
Why does this always happen to me? Because your brain is a question answering device. And if you ask it a bad question, it'll give you an answer.
Yeah.
And it may be an answer that you believe, right? It may be an answer you believe because you've heard it your whole life. Like those real hypnotists, like our parents and teachers and priests or whatever, who told us things our whole lives that we've just taken in and accepted as true because we've heard them our whole lives. Like, oh, you'll never amount to anything. You're so lazy. Your brother, he was good, but you're lazy, kind of shit. Not that my mother has said that to me. I'm not quoting anyone that I know. I'm not. But if I had, I'd have to do a lot of work about that because part of me would fully believe it because I heard it so much. So yes, we can do a lot of NLP. We can do a lot of hypnosis processes to change old things. That's fine. We can do that. It's great. Yeah. And we can also say, what's good about this? What's not perfect yet? How can we change things? Good how questions. How can we change this? And this probably is a great place not to ask why, but to ask how. What are we going to do here that's different? Kind of a stoic approach. It's like, okay, this is reality, and where are we going from here? So asking good questions is really going to direct your focus towards the things that you want to be doing, and that is a really great thing. So how does Sleight of Mouth tie into that? I think because we start with knowing where you are and asking why questions and other questions to elicit the belief, then we can probably use that to say, and is that really working for you? Is that what you want? Well, what do you want instead? Where are we going from here? So we can start from where we are and then find a direction that will be more appropriate for that person by asking more positively veiled questions.
Yeah, and you also state in the book that it's not only to change a limiting belief, but it can also be used to reinforce a positive belief to make it even more positive. Yeah,
that's absolutely true.
Perfect.
That is, in a sense, what you're simultaneously doing when you do Sleight of Mouth. You're leading them from one position to another position. So you're kind of taking the belief structure apart from one place and building it someplace else.
Exactly. And when somebody is sharing with you his beliefs, sometimes it may trigger some reactions inside. How do you have any tip, or how do you do to dissociate from that and be really fully present for the person and not mix your own belief set in the soup?
Yeah. Is that even possible?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, it's very possible when I'm in a therapeutic situation.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting in my office with somebody or online with them, and I'm doing a coaching session and they tell me what their beliefs are, it's like I've already sort of set up this coaching relationship. And I'm already got this kind of therapist head on, whereas like I'm part of the process and I am apart from it at the same time.
Yeah. So
to me, that's a really important position to have. I'm part of it and I'm apart from it at the same time. It's a both and awareness that comes from an Ericksonian hypnosis kind of point of view, but it's a both and, not either or, both and. I'm really good at that in a NLP therapy, if you will, situation or a coaching situation. I have noticed that I sometimes do get triggered when I'm not in a therapeutic situation, and therefore don't have that preset relationship happening. And somebody says something that's just like, what? Get it, and I just will find myself reacting and saying things that may not be like, wow, yes, I see what you're saying. And, I don't necessarily do that. I sometimes go like, yeah, but, and so, yeah. Then you got to sort of take a breath and step back into the situation. Yeah. But yeah, we're all human. Yeah. And I think it's good to know that you can apologize for your outburst and return back to a more thing. But it is practice. I think for the dissociation is really useful. Dissociation can be a problem if a person has like too much dissociative situation going on in their lives. There's a dissociative problem state that can be from traumas, etc. That can be a problem in a therapy situation, or like, if you're a doctor, you don't want to be associated to this the horrible mangled body in front of you. You want to be like, oh wow, we have to reattach the femur here, and we have to do this thing. You have to be dissociated from this body that you're working on in order to do it properly. That's important. That's necessary. That's good. So a certain amount of dissociation, but this both and thing is really important. And that's one of the things I talk a lot about in my hypnosis trainings, is a appreciation and utilization of a both and awareness.
Yeah.
Do you have a special tip in order to get there easily and quickly, especially, for example, in relationships or in a work situation where we could access that state of being there and being dissociated at the same time? Do you have a
I don't know if there's a quick tip available exactly, but I do have lots of tips available. I think there's processes you can work on and practice. It's kind of like saying, can you teach me how to play that Rachmaninoff concerto real quick? I have 5 minutes. Could you teach that to me? It's like, no, I don't have a quick tip. I can get you started and show you what you need to do to get there. But it does take some practice. It does take some practice. I have a hypnosis process I learned from Ernest Rossi called, I call it the hands together thing. It's probably got a better title somewhere, but where you watch your hands and you just stare between them and you don't do anything. You're just watching those hands as if they're separate from you. So they're your hands, of course, so you're part of it, but they're also watching them as if they are separate from you, so you're part from it at the same time. And then if you're doing this with another person, you ask them to say, okay, so you just sit there, watch those hands with a sense of detached curiosity, and I'm going to ask your unconscious mind to bring your hands closer and closer together until they touch. But I don't want you to do that. I want you to just sit back and watch and be curious what will happen. And generally speaking, over time, and I'm really not going to do anything with my hands. I'm just going to see if anything happens. I'm not trying to do anything whatsoever. But little by little, generally speaking, the hands do get closer and closer together. And generally speaking, 9 times out of 10 or so, they get all the way together and touch. And then the person has this experience of like, holy crap, that's amazing. I can actually do things without doing things, so they recognize that there's more than one part of themselves. There's a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. And that's kind of cool. That I've never actually done this without trying, as a demonstration without actually doing this. It's kind of cool. So I'm actually talking and being in this little trance at the same time.
That's fantastic.
That's pretty cool.
And we lost him.
And that was the end of the conversation. But yeah, so I teach things like that, and I teach other sort of processes that you can do, things that I've learned from Stephen Gilligan along the way about how to, enhance or get comfortable with this both and awareness.
Yeah. But you mentioned something very, very important, and it's the practice.
Yeah.
We insist a lot with our students for them to the last day of the training. It's not the last day. It's just the beginning of a training, and we insist a lot in that. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you set up like practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But to be certified, they need to have hours and hours of practice as practitioner and as client. Then it's because it's fundamental. You cannot be called practitioner if you don't practice. It's a nonsense.
Yeah, good point.
So yeah. And because we're connected with NLP, in NLP, there's this distinction between surface structure and deep structure. And I guess that when you're using Sleight of Mouth, you're kind of extracting the deep structure within the person. What's your view about this?
Well, it's deeper structure, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, there's the thing. One of the things I was referring to a moment ago is the meta model. When you ask questions like, well, how specifically you're going to do that, or who says that's good, or who says that's bad, you know, these different meta model questions that can be very necessary to extract deeper structure. But you're never going to get to the deep structure, because I can't share experience with you. I can share a sandwich with you, but I can't share experience with you. And no matter how hard you try, no matter how specific you get with your language, and you're never going to convey in language the deep experience that's there. So as an example, the category in the meta model of unspecified verb, if I said, you know, I went to the store, you know, went is an unspecified verb. I'm not sure, does this translate to French as well?
Yeah.
Specified verbs. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So if I say I went to the store, you say, well, how specifically did you go to the store? And I could say, well, I drove to the store. Now, is that deep structure? No. It's deeper. It's more specific than went to the store. But then you'd say, well, that's still unspecified verb. Well, how specifically did you drive to the store? And I said, well, I drove in my car. It's like, okay, well, and how specifically did you drive in your car? I drove really fast. Okay, so how specifically did you drive really fast in your car? I drove at, you know, 60 kilometers per hour in my car. Oh, how specifically did you drive? You know, we could always ask more specific questions, and we'll still never get to the experience of driving to the store.
Yeah.
Just, you know, a very detailed description of it, perhaps, but not the experience. So you can get to a deeper structure, but not to the deepest or the actual experience.
Yeah. I have another question. You in the book you explain, I think, if I remember correctly, that there's always what we are searching is a kind of reframe for the belief. Is there always some way to reframe reality?
Oh, golly. Is there always some way to reframe reality? That's a deep question. I would say yes, and perhaps some things would be easier to reframe than others. I was talking with, actually, I was doing a podcast recording this morning with a fellow named Rex Sykes, who is an NLP trainer in the United States and author of a few books, including, let me just get the title right here, Live Life on Your Terms, Live the Life You Want, his most recent book. But that book talks about experiences that he's had where, like he had a skydiving accident. Actually didn't get details of what that meant exactly. Obviously, he didn't die from it, and he can walk and everything. But he had some sort of skydiving accident that messed him up big time, you know, mentally, emotionally. But he straightened himself back out again, and a lot of his learnings from that are talked about in that book. But what he was saying is that when shit was happening in life, he thought, oh man, I wish this would never have happened. This was terrible. This was the worst thing that could have happened. I wish that had never happened. But as he's gone on in life and looked back on that, those are really important times in his life that gave him direction and gave him perspective and helped him to get to where he is in life. That wouldn't have happened without this horrible thing. So was it horrible? It was when it was happening, you know? So that's a reframe. That things that are obstacles are not obstacles, they're opportunities. You know, in fact, there's a book I have not read. I can't say I recommend it, but I love the title, which is The Obstacle is the Way. Yeah, so it's probably a good book. I don't know.
Mm. There's one thing that I like in your book, because I had a confusion always when I was thinking about the patterns, a confusion between chunk up and changing frame size. And I really appreciated that you explain in the book that actually chunking up is more blowing up and making a kind of exaggeration. And it makes things clearer, because sometimes when you just look at the thing, between changing frame size and chunking up, I didn't really see the difference that was behind. So yeah, that was a good one. I liked it.
Thank you. Yeah, good clarification. Yeah, I agree. I was smart there. That's my one thing. But yeah, I've actually talked to Robert about that. I don't know if he completely agrees with me or not, but I do think that I'm right and he's wrong in this particular case. That it should be called blow up, or it should be called the exaggeration pattern rather than chunk up. But it's so nice. He liked the symmetry of the chunk down and the chunk up with the two arrows right next to each other, and it worked for him. I don't think he ever thought like, what's this going to be like in 40 years? I think he just kind of did it for himself back in 1980 or whatever it was. So don't think he thought it through quite as deeply as we might have hoped.
Yeah.
But it works really well. But yeah, so chunking up is, of course, you get more general.
Yeah.
It's not just what happens in that pattern in Sleight of Mouth, where you kind of diminish one side of the syllogism and blow up to the nth degree, totally exaggerate the results. So you mean slipping up and saying something irritable means that I'm going to be doomed to be evil for all eternity? So you exaggerate that.
And just as a second one, because this is for the geeks, the second geek question is concerning metaframe, because metaframe can become quite nasty, as you write clearly in the book. It may become quite nasty and quite provocative. How do you make sure you don't cross the line?
So let me just to be straight here. So this geek question you're asking on behalf of geeks everywhere? Not that
perhaps. I when I say geek question, it's more for people who know a little bit,
Other people
who
already know about the
about
the thing.
Yeah. I know. Just wanted to be clear.
Never, ever would he be.
Never.
Are you suggesting that?
No, not.
Of course not.
No. Those people. They people. So those people should recognize that, yes, they are right, that it can be, certainly sounds that way in the books, and easy to read them that way. And you can also change your tonality.
Yeah. Okay, just a quick diversion for the people that are not geeks and may be listening to us right now. What are we talking about? So can
so nice.
I am so nice. So could you explain what the metaframe pattern is?
Yes.
For them, of course.
Yes, for the other them.
For the other them.
People that are not geeks, the non-geeks amongst us. Certainly, the metaframe is one of the 14 Sleight of Mouth patterns. Yeah. That is above. It's drawn on this sheet as being above all the other ones, which is what a meta position is. I'm above all the rest. So this metaframe pattern is drawn just along the top of all the other patterns, and it. To me, my way of thinking of it is that it's kind of like what you would pay good money to be manipulated by a psychiatrist for, right? So if you pay good money to a psychiatrist, what are they going to do? They're going to be doing analysis. And they're going to be saying, I see, so you're only saying this because you have this deep desire to own your mother and to get rid of your father. So that's what the big problem really is, right? So they're doing this deep analysis of what's really going on deep inside. right? So they're meta to this whole thing, and they can see, like, from God's eye view or heaven, they're looking down and seeing the real, true, deep motivation inside the person. So it's this meta frame example. So a lot of them start off with this kind of language pattern of like, you're only saying that because, right? So it can be very accusatory.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It can be very like, you're only saying that because you make unrealistic expectations from other people and then blame it on them when you get disappointed. So it can be like that. Or it could be said like the psychiatrist and say, oh, so it seems to me that you're only saying that because you make unrealistic expectations for other people and you blame it on them when you get disappointed. Right, so you could, and they go like, "Oh, doctor, wow, that is so deep. Wow, thank you. Wow, I guess I do." And then you've earned your $300 an hour.
Oh my! So
Do you have your geek?
I have my geek answer. It's perfect.
So it's all in how you say it.
Yeah, that's perfect. What would be like your best anecdote? I'm sure you have plenty of fantastic anecdotes using Sleight of Mouth, but one that pops into your mind and that you wish to share with us.
And you don't have to give the name of the person.
Thank you. So it's not Nathalie. It's not my experience with Nathalie when she was in New York City all those years ago, and Frank Farrelly is president now. It's nothing to do with that. So no, this particular woman that I'm thinking of is somebody else entirely, not named Nathalie. It was this is something I think I talk about in my book. I'm pretty sure I do, actually. It's been a while since I read it. But I was dating this girl, euphemism dating, and we were both trainers for Tony Robbins at the time, back in the day. And I'll just make a long story pretty short here. Let's just say, suffice it to say, she left the relationship and started a new one while I was out of town. And it was pretty devastating to me at the time. And then we were both at a Tony Robbins. We were both trainers for Tony Robbins, and we were at this Tony Robbins event in New York City. And I was getting ready to go home. It was late at night. It was like 3 a.m. or something like that, because these events go long. And she said, "Hey, do you want to share a cab?" And now she had moved out from our mutual apartment and gotten her new place in Manhattan. So I thought, wow, maybe she wants to, maybe this little distance that we've had from each other is good. Maybe she wants to get back together again. So I said, yeah, sure, okay. And then when we got the location of her apartment, she said, "Do you want to come up?" And we were like, yeah, sure, yeah, it'd be great. Thinking, all right, this is really working. This little distance we made is going to be really nurturing for our relationship. And then when she got me upstairs, she said, "I just wanted to tell you in person that while you were out of town, I started this relationship with our relationship coach." I said, "You what?" And yeah, because we'd been going to this guy that she thought was really attractive, apparently. So anyway, so I was, of course, not in this dissociated coach position. I was very much not in that position. I was very much like, what? Ugh! And I was absolutely certain that I was right.
Mm-hmm.
And she and they were wrong. No doubt in my mind about this whatsoever. So, of course, I dug my heels in and said, "You're wrong because of this reason," or whatever. And I called the guy in question up on the phone, even though it was like 3 a.m, and because I knew him, and started reading him the riot act, just giving it to him, both barrels. And because I was so certain I was right and he was flat out wrong, no question about it, I was a little surprised when I started, hearing him give all these good reasons why the opposite was true, that he was right. And and I was wrong. And so my position started becoming, wait, hold on now. Oh, shoot, gosh, oh my God, oh, no, wait, jeepers. Oh, well, yeah, I guess you're right, yeah. So, and a part of me thought, no, wait a second, you just learned sleight of mouth. You just got back from, I was out of town when all this happened because I was in Santa Cruz, California, learning sleight of mouth from Robert Dilts. That's when it happened. I was learning sleight of mouth when this all went down. So I thought to myself, I wonder if maybe some of that could be used in this situation. And so that was when I had my big kind of aha moment. And that's one of those, by the way, obstacles that became a great thing for me in life. Horrible experience emotionally, physically. It was just terrible. But wow, I learned something really important at that time, which is how to step back and be that sort of dissociated thing. And I saw all these sleight of mouth patterns in front of me, like on a plexiglass screen, as if they were all there in space and I could just, touch them and put my hands on them. I was like, whoa. And then I thought, okay, what is he saying? He's saying if this, then this. So I said, okay, well, gosh, don't you think it's more important to do this and do this? And he was like, well, maybe. And as he was thinking about that, I said, because blah, 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 blah. And I went to another pattern, like the intent pattern. Yeah. And he was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And while he was thinking about that, I said, because, and I went to another outcome pattern. It's not really about this, it's about something else. And so I was, in a sense, doing the 1-2 punch thing, combinations of different sleight of mouth patterns coming at him in different ways. And before I know it, I was like, and I wasn't one-fisted, but I was like, kung fu, whatever. And he was reeling from this thing. I was like, wow, I never thought of it that way. I guess you're right. I'm so sorry. Yeah, wow, it's incredible. And so I totally won that battle. And that was great. I had lost the war because they got married a few months later. But thank God it wasn't me. So I won.
Thank you very much, Doug. We know that you have an appointment coming soon, so thank you for this last anecdote, which always ends with quite a lot of fun. We were afraid that we would lose you when you just left on the flight. So really, really thank you so much. Really appreciate that you took some time to answer to Nathalie's chase. Thank you so much.
It has been an honor and a real pleasure to have the opportunity to meet you all those years ago with Frank, and to be able, thanks to internet and Facebook, to get in touch and reconnect.
And to be able to do this, Zoom, it's incredible.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Can you imagine what would have happened to the world if COVID had taken place in like 1990?
Oh, wow.
Before there was no internet, before there was no mass communication, and oh my gracious.
Yeah.
But thank God we had Zoom to get us through this thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
great to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all of you who are watching this. Subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of masterclasses, really great people. And see you soon.